Now, before I start this video, let me start off by saying that I actually do like Sonic Frontiers. I think the story and characters were great. I think Sage is a very welcome addition to the cast. The soundtrack is easily my favorite out of any Sonic game, and I think the boss fights were overall just amazing. But with that being said, I did have one problem with the final boss, that being the end. I think the end is probably the worst final boss in Sonic history, if not just one of the worst Sonic bosses ever. And funny enough, while I was actually recording this video, I actually happened to see a bunch of people also complaining about the final boss. However, I'd like to take it a step further and explain why nothing about this boss actually works. Now let me start off with the obvious. Why am I playing Ikaruga? No, seriously, this entire boss fight is literally just one big game of Ikaruga. For those who don't know what Ikaruga is, it's basically a shooting game where you shoot two different colors, being white and black, and whichever color you have selected, being white or black, you're immune to the bullets of the same color by your enemy. So this entire boss fight is literally just a clone of Ikaruga. And to make matters worse, this is actually just the hacking minigame which we've actually seen earlier on in this game, even having the same projectiles in that minigame, let alone the fact that the hacking game is actually reoccurring and shows up in two of the worlds. So I don't think you can even really make the argument that it's even an original boss if it's just a minigame. Now, for those who actually like Ikaruga, they probably found some enjoyment from this boss, or at least that's what I've heard. But at the end of the day, I think we should at least acknowledge that this just isn't the type of game that Sonic Frontiers is. I think that this should have just stayed being a minigame and literally shouldn't have been the final boss of the game. And apparently there was actually traces of a supersonic boss fight at the end of the game, however it was apparently just scrapped, which kinda sucks when you think about it. I remember when I was actually playing this, I was hoping that this was actually just the first phase, but then the boss fight just kind of ended and I was left disappointed. But I'm not just gonna end it there, because sure, in a gameplay sense this boss fight really sucks. I think most of us were let down by it, but there's actually something more to this boss fight that was disappointing, and I actually want to go more over that. For instance, I think that this boss in general is just uninteresting. I mean, let's take a step back and see how much personality this character really has. At the start of the game, this strange voice talks to Sonic and it just gives him instructions and that's really it. Sonic doesn't really interact with this character other than trying to ask it a question, which it just promptly ignores. So this thing doesn't really have much of a personality to begin with. Like, sure, we finally freed this all-powerful being, but now what? What's it gonna do now that it's free? It's just gonna destroy the world because... well, honestly, I'm not sure why. This being just wants to destroy the world because, and like I said, it's not very interesting or have any real motive. I mean, think about it. It doesn't even thank Sonic for freeing it, and when Sonic does free it, he doesn't even say anything to it. Throughout the entirety of the boss fight, Sonic is pretty much just mute, and even after defeating it, Sonic doesn't say a single word about it. But with that being said, at least try talking to Sonic. And while I did think those words were interesting at first, since I wanted to know more about this boss, fast forwarding to after I defeated the boss, I decided to talk to my brother about it since we ended up beating the game roughly around the same time. And you know what he said to me? He said the dialogue was annoying. At first I was confused and I wanted to ask him why. And he said it was because he kept on dying and he had to repeat it. Which, fair enough, I guess. That would be a little annoying having to hear the dialogue over and over again. And I said, well, besides that, you at least thought the dialogue it said was interesting, right? And he actually said something that kind of hit me and made me realize just how uninteresting this boss really is. He said, "Who cares? It's just a giant circle telling me how powerful it is." That line, which is actually pretty funny when you think about it, actually made me realize that this boss is just kind of boring. On top of that, it has such a basic design. It's just a purple moon, aka just a circle. Honestly, I think this boss would have benefited from having a much better design. I mean, just look at all the other final bosses that we got from Sonic that have so much more interesting designs compared to this thing. Now going back to personality, this thing has no reason to destroy despite the fact that it's an intelligent being, which means it can have real motives and try to communicate that to us. But despite that, its only words are how it's so powerful and that Sonic has no hope of defeating it because this thing's a god or something. It doesn't really have to be complicated. It could have just been something simple as maybe it just wanted to steal the energy from the planets to become more powerful, but even then that was actually never really established in the game. When I think of a monster that destroys just to destroy, I think of a monster with no intelligence and is just rampaging and letting loose and, you know, nothing really much to it. But this thing is intelligent, it can talk, it could have a real motive. I mean, think of Chaos, the god of destruction. Chaos is just seemingly a rampaging monster, who's literally titled the god of destruction. It should be right up his alley to destroy things just for the sake of destroying them. But even with that being said, they actually gave Chaos a reason as to why he destroys. Chaos actually started off as a kind-hearted creature who actually guarded the Chaos Emeralds in the Chao. However, once the Echidna attacked the Chao in order to get the Chaos Emeralds, Chaos actually absorbed the power of the Chaos Emeralds, becoming infused with the negative energy. The path of destruction that Chaos went down was one of hatred and sadness over the loss of his friends. It's only when Supersonic brings out the positive energy of the Chaos Emeralds and defeats Chaos does he actually cleanse him of his rage, and only then does something in him begin to change. At the end of the game, we see Chaos is actually reunited with Tikal and the Chaos that he looked over, showing that they were all okay and that Chaos can leave his vengeful past behind. We got all of that lore from a rampaging monster. They could have just said that Chaos was the god of destruction and that was it. We didn't need all of this serious lore, but they gave it to us anyway because they actually cared about this character. Heck, I could even talk about another example being the Biolizard. He didn't really share the same motives as Chaos, and really he's just a rampaging monster. But even then, there's actually a story behind him. The Biolizard is known as the prototype of the ultimate life form. Emphasis on the word prototype. The Biolizard was considered a failure. Sure, this creature was powerful, and that's what they wanted from the ultimate life form. It could even regenerate and even use chaos abilities. But at what cost did it have these abilities? This thing is basically on life support. It needs a machine in order to function properly. So even with regeneration, this thing isn't even in perfect health. On top of that, it's basically just a mindless animal. It's very aggressive towards the scientists, and it was actually because of its outburst that the GUN actually found out about the Biolizard, which is actually what caused the arc to be rated to begin with. The Biolizard may not really have any personality, but even so, it doesn't have one because it's not supposed to have one. The fact that he's a wild rampaging monster is what makes him perfect, because he's not supposed to be perfect. He's a prototype of what would later become Shadow the Hedgehog, and Shadow actually fixes the problems he had with the Biolizard. On top of that, he's even stronger than the Biolizard, proving that he is in fact the true ultimate life form. So even when compared to two rampaging monsters such as Chaos and the Biolizard, I think the end just really underperforms as a final boss. However, a somewhat more accurate comparison would actually be Merlina from Sonic and the Black Knight, as she would actually also end up betraying Sonic to achieve her goal. But Merlina didn't just want all this power to destroy. Quite the opposite actually. She wanted to make a world that would never end. Essentially, she was going through a midlife crisis. And Sonic explains that while it's sad that everything must eventually come to an end, we should be enjoying our lives in the time that we have left. It's a fairly powerful message that she ends up taking to heart, and accepts the fact that our world will eventually end one day. So even then, she had a pretty good motive, and the story overall carries a pretty powerful message. But like I said before, the end doesn't really have any of that going for it. Matter of fact, the end doesn't even really have an origin story to speak of. We don't even know how this being became all powerful, or if it even already just started out like this. But even being all powerful really doesn't matter, since this isn't even the strongest threat that Sonic has faced. When it comes to the strongest foe, I would have to say it'd be Solaris, who took the combined efforts of Super Sonic, Shadow, and Silver. And to quote Eggman on how powerful Solaris really is,
"It will consume all existing timelines, and time itself will collapse and disappear into nothingness. We've got to defeat it now!" No, it is a transcendent life form that exists in the past, present, and future. Defeating it here, now, would do nothing. That body of light is the sign of a super-dimensional life form. Standard attacks won't work on him. He eats dimensions for lunch.
Now compare that to the End, who was really only shown being able to destroy planets at best. Keep in mind that Solaris was going to start destroying all existing timelines and time itself not long after its full revival. I could also take some time to talk about some inconsistencies with the End, like how its attack that's apparently able to destroy the entire world was able to be held back by Supersonic, even though Supersonic was hit by a much smaller laser that was completely capable of taking him out of his super form. Or the fact that Sage was completely able to hold back and neutralize the laser shot out by the End, as shown when Supersonic took his hands off of it and left it to Sage. So maybe Sage is actually capable of defeating the End by herself? But not only that, because the End has been destroying planets for really who knows how long, meanwhile Solaris is easily able to destroy dimensions. So not only is Solaris stronger, but he's easily more efficient. And really when it comes to Solaris, I'm not actually sure as to why he wants to end all of existence. But even then, we actually know his origin story. We even see some of his personality reflected in Mephiles. And as already established, he's even more efficient at what he wants to do. Even then, he was also just created first, so he's literally just a better version of the End in every way. He even has his very own religion. Matter of fact, I could even go into the fact that the symbol of Soliana is actually an eagle, which is actually the appearance of him. However, if Soliana actually has the symbol of the eagle, and Solaris started off as a flame, did they actually know that he would end up becoming an eagle? Or in a way, could that be what Solaris actually formed himself after? Which would actually be kind of wholesome when you think about it, even if he doesn't really care about the religion that they build up around him. Also, just think about it, Star Wars was split into two halves. One half actually ended up killing Sonic, and the other half was shown to be able to conquer the entire world. But listen, I could talk about final bosses all day, and while that would be kind of interesting, the script is getting kind of long, so I think I should wrap things up. So, in conclusion, the end is a failure of a final boss because the gameplay is not fitting to the other Supersonic boss fights and is just an Ikaruga clone, which has already been experienced in a reoccurring minigame. The character and the story that it tells is uncompelling and all-around basic. It has a very uninteresting design which does not do it any favors, and it is not even the strongest foe that Sonic has ever faced, so it's not even special in that regards. But it's not like the boss is really that uninteresting, as it did say something that kind of piqued my interest. This thing did say that it was infinite, which means that it could be connected to the real Infinite. Maybe the Phantom Ruby is actually part of this being, and that could explain why when Infinite used its power, he actually changed his name to Infinite. It also said, no matter what form I take, the end comes for you all. However, this is just a conspiracy theory and it's not really confirmed. I also can't lie, despite how bland this character is, I really do like its whole monologue during the final boss fight. It's kind of funny how much I quote these lines when talking to my brother just because I like how they sound. So even if the character's kind of boring, I will say that it does have some pretty good quotes. But that's all I really have to say for this video. If you guys agree or disagree with me, let me know in the comment section down below. I'd actually like to hear your takes on the other final Sonic bosses and maybe see how it stacks compared to this one. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. But until next time, this is Jules Prime, and I will hopefully see you all in the next video.